Good morning. I'm just going to conclude my series on the 2009 Pearl Springs tournament. It's the 10th round, and so far Magnus has won 5 and drawn 4. And plays his final round game against Dmitry Yakovenko. And let's see what happens. So get rid of that. D4, D5. Bishop C4, pawn C4, Queen's Gambit, very standard stuff. Yeah, Queen's Gambit declined. You see this many times. Yeah, the knight comes out to put more pressure on the D5 pawn, and the bishop comes out. It isn't a real threat to take the pawn yet, since it would be, even if he took the pawn, it would still be defended twice. But he takes the pawn and changes the structure. And thanks, with his majority on the king side, he can win, even although it is 4-3, 4 against 3 on the king side. But if this pawn disappears, it's a really weak queen side for Carlsen. But he has a huge overweight of pawns on the king side in compensation, considered by theory to be about level. So, rather like the London system, he develops his bishop. But because the pawns are already swapped off, this is the Charosek variation. And he defends the pawn. Yeah. He isn't threatening to take it directly, but it allows the queen to come into the game and relieves from the queen the duty of having to defend the pawn. So, yeah, and the queen develops. And traded bishops is proposed and accepted. And Carlsen plays e3 so that he can develop his bishop into the game. The knight's developed and the bishop is developed. This hinders black from castling. Now, if he castles immediately, bishop takes pawn will win the game. So instead of castling, he plays b6, ready to develop his bishop. And the knight comes to f3. The bishop comes to a6. This is a reasonable way of taking care of this bishop and thereby this threat and allowing black to castle. Does white want to take the bishop or not? If he takes the bishop, it gets taken back by the knight, and he's just helped black to develop. You might say the knight is in a bit of an awkward spot, but it can soon come to c7, and if he takes, the knight takes. Pawn comes here to prevent the knight coming to b4. The knight comes to c7, and they both castle. Then they're both just as far forward in development, and black would have more pieces on the queen side where he has a majority of pawns. This would just be helping him. So he castles and says, if you want that taken, you're going to have to take it yourself. And he does, which allows the queen to continue the pressure on the queen side. Pressure is much less serious now, of course. Now the bishop is removed. The knight is developed, and black just needs to castle, and he's finished with his developments. So white makes the break whilst he can. Of course, he can enforce e4 now because it's attacked 3 times, twice and defended just once. Castles anyway. Does Carlsen want to take? No, of course not. This would be a very poor positional judgment to take the pawn. It would make the situation where black was closer to having a free pawn on the queen side nearer, not further away. Instead, he pushes the pawn, opens up the diagonal again for the queen, and restricts his opponent's queen. Queen comes to e6. The rook defends the pawn, and the other rook challenges that file. The knight comes to h4. I wondered very much about coming to g5, but then, he can just attack it straight away. You might say he can attack it straight away with the queen here, but it's not as effective because the knight could then come here. Oh, but he could pin the knight. No, he couldn't, because knight takes knight would be check and would unpin the knight. So he comes to g6, and it's taken. And Yakovenko offers a queen exchange. Carlsen declines. He doesn't want to go into an endgame until he's sure he's got an endgame advantage. Very wise. You know, one thing very typical of Carlsen that I really like is that he waits until everything is as good as it can be before making his winning push. He plays f4 here. He's threatening to play f5 and not just crush the queen, but take up a great deal of space on the king side. That can't be allowed, so he plays queen to f5 to stop the pawn coming to f5. But Carlsen reroutes his knight so that he can chase away the queen so that he can play f5. Can't be stopped. f6. So Yakovenko decides he'll try to break down that pawn structure. The queen gets chased away. And Carlsen, yeah, I don't mind. Break down that pawn structure. I'm still going to end up with a supported pass pawn in the middle if you take it. And he does indeed take it. Yeah, I'd just like you to stop a minute, evaluate the position, and two things. With which pawn would you capture, and what is your evaluation of this position? What do you think the fish says the number is? Excuse me. Okay, put the video on pause if you need to. My view is that with either capture, white will have supported pass pawn. The pawn on e5 will be supported, either defended by the pawn on f4 if he takes that way, or defended by the pawn on d5 if he takes that way. Black, yeah, has a difficult position. It looks fairly even, but he has a difficult position. He's going to struggle to stop those pawns. Plus, none of his pieces are in particularly active positions. His knight could maybe at some point in time come to g6. His queen hasn't got very many active forward deployments, and the rooks, even although they are connected, they're not particularly active. One's just guarding against the strong pawn. It's quite a passive position, and I would guess that the evaluation is about 2.1 to white, plus 2.1, and I would 100% of the time take with the f pawn. So let's see what the analysis says first. Okay, 1 comma c6, not, not 1 3/4, sorry, not 2, not quite as high as I said, but good anyway. But Carlsen takes with the queen's pawn. And if we just check the analysis, that was the best move. It's one of those unusual situations where you don't take with a pawn towards the middle. You don't increase the number of pawns you've got in the middle. Why? Because the pawns, when you play, if you take with the f pawn, then the f file becomes a semi-open file, and the two players can fight for it. As it stands, there's no fully open file, and white has good control over all the semi-open files except for the C file, but the C file is the file which is least useful to black because the openness is on white's side of the board. The knight comes to e6 in an attempt to delay the pushing of the pawns. It just encourages the pushing of the pawns. Okay, the knight comes to c5 to attack the queen. The queen comes to d4, hindering also the movement of black's pawns. And then it comes c4, where black now has a serious threat of playing c5 and getting a little steamroller of his own pawns going. Has Carlsen gone wrong? No, he's just seen a little bit deeper. Great temporary sacrifice. If he takes with a pawn, of course, Carlsen takes the rook with the knight, and he can't take back or the queen would be lost. And if he takes with the queen, well, that's what he does, he takes with the queen, then Carlsen takes the pawn with the queen, and he's still got the sported pass pawn. And his pass pawn is nearer to queening than the black. Black now has a pass pawn on. Oh, it's not pass because the b pawn stops it. So he doesn't have a pass pawn. White has a pass pawn, and it's very near to queening. Centralizes the rook, but really, there's not much hope. So a pair of rooks are swapped, and the rook takes up the most active position that it can. The pawns push up, and both centralize their kings. And as I say, Carlsen can play f6, but he waits until everything's perfect. He could have thought, maybe I should play one rook here and one rook here so that everything's covered, but it isn't any better if he does that. So he takes the pawn, and he says check, and he says check again, and here he resigns. Why can't he get some sort of a perpetual check here? It is really worth your while to explore this position with a computer, but no, he can't get a perpetual check. And after his checks run out, then Carlsen is going to be able to play a pawn to f7 or pawn to e7. So, yeah, my first thought was, can't he play rook to g8 check and then double up the rooks on the second rank? No, it's not going to work for him. It's just not going to work for him because it's not going to work for him. It's that simple. I don't want to tell you. I want you to work it out for yourself. Why? Answers to me on a postcard, please. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment on my videos. Thanks. Bye.